The security camera in the corner of the executive daycare captured everything that afternoon, though the truth it recorded and the truth Victoria Ashford believed she was seeing were two entirely different things. She sat alone in her corner office on the 32nd floor of Ashford Holdings, the Chicago skyline glittering behind her like a promise she had long stopped believing in. Her laptop displayed the live feed from her son's playroom, a secret surveillance system she had installed 3 months ago without telling anyone, not even her most trusted assistant. On the grainy screen, 7-year-old Oliver stood frozen in front of a half-built model airplane, his small hands trembling visibly as pieces refused to fit together the way his perfectionist mind desperately needed them to. Then it happened, sudden as a summer storm. Oliver's frustration erupted without warning. He swept his arm violently across the table, scattering plastic pieces everywhere across the expensive carpet, and slammed his open palm against the wall hard enough to make Victoria flinch from 32 floors above. Before she could reach for her phone to call the daycare, a figure entered the frame from the left side. Ethan Mercer, the building's janitor, moved toward her son with calm and deliberate steps that suggested he had seen such moments before. He caught Oliver's wrist mid-swing, preventing the boy from striking the wall again and injuring himself further. From Victoria's angle, from the camera's cold and unblinking eye, the protective gesture looked exactly like a grown man grabbing a child with sudden force. Victoria's blood turned to ice in her veins. But then, something unexpected shifted in the frame. Oliver's rigid body began to soften gradually. His rapid breathing slowed to something approaching normal. And in the steady presence of a janitor she barely acknowledged when they passed in hallways, her troubled son found a peace that Victoria herself had never been able to give him, despite 7 years of desperate trying. She reached for the phone anyway, her manicured fingers already dialing security. Ethan Mercer had learned long ago that dignity was not something the world gave you freely. It was something you built with your own 2 calloused hands, brick by brick, on the foundation of whatever wreckage life decided to leave behind. He was 34 years old and lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Pilsen, the kind of place where radiators clanged like percussion instruments through the cold winter nights, and the elevator worked only when it felt generous enough to cooperate. The building superintendent had stopped apologizing for the broken hallway lights months ago, and Ethan had stopped expecting him to fix them. He simply carried a small flashlight in his back pocket and taught his daughter Lily to count the stairs in the dark, turning necessity into a game that made her giggle instead of cry. Lily was 7 years old, the same age as Oliver Ashford, though the 2 children might as well have lived on entirely different planets, orbiting different suns. Where Oliver had private tutors and specialized therapists and a playroom filled with educational toys that cost more than Ethan's monthly rent, Lily had secondhand books from the public library and a father who read to her every single night without fail, no matter how exhausted his body felt after long hours of physical labor. Where Oliver wore clothes with designer labels Ethan could not even pronounce, Lily wore hand-me-downs from the church donation bin, carefully mended at the seams where other children's wear had torn through the fabric. But Lily was genuinely happy in ways that seemed to elude Oliver, despite all his advantages. That was what Ethan held on to during the long nights when grief still found him in the darkness, when he reached across the bed out of habit and found only empty sheets where his wife Sarah should have been lying beside him. Cancer had taken her 3 years ago, swift and merciless as a thief in the night, leaving Ethan with a daughter to raise alone and a hole in his chest that never quite managed to close, no matter how much time passed. He had been an electrician back then, with a small but growing business and steady clients who trusted his work and a future that looked bright enough to believe in. The medical bills changed everything with brutal efficiency. Insurance covered only fragments of what the treatments cost. The business folded under the weight of accumulating debt. The clients disappeared when Ethan could no longer show up reliably for scheduled jobs. And Ethan found himself mopping floors in a downtown high-rise, invisible to the executives who stepped over his freshly cleaned tiles without so much as a glance in his direction. He never once complained about his circumstances. Complaint was a luxury reserved for people who still had options. Victoria Ashford had options. She had more options than anyone Ethan had ever encountered in his 34 years of living, yet she moved through the world as though she were trapped in a cage of her own careful design. He saw her sometimes in the lobby during his early morning shifts, a tall woman with striking auburn hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin of her face, into a permanent expression of controlled tension. She wore power suits in shades of charcoal and navy, colors that absorbed light rather than reflected it. Her designer heels clicked against the marble floor with a rhythm that made other employees scatter like startled birds, and her sharp eyes swept over the building's maintenance staff as though they were merely furniture. Ethan knew her story from the version that circulated freely in break rooms and supply closets. Divorced 2 years ago from a man whose family name appeared on hospital wings. A custody battle that had dragged through the courts like a wounded animal. A judge who had finally granted her full custody only after Victoria had proven, through expensive lawyers and mountains of documentation, that her ex-husband was demonstrably unfit to raise their son. What nobody talked about openly was the profound fear that lived beneath Victoria's carefully constructed armor. She had won Oliver in court through force of will, but the victory felt provisional, temporary, a verdict that could be overturned at any moment if she made a single mistake. Her ex-husband's lawyers were still circling like patient sharks, still looking for any evidence that she was an unfit mother. So Victoria controlled everything within her reach, every variable that could be managed, every moment of her son's daily life captured on hidden cameras, because she could not bear the thought of something happening that she did not see, did not anticipate, did not prevent through careful planning. Oliver paid the heavy price for his mother's constant vigilance. He was a brilliant child by every measure, testing 2 full grades above his level in mathematics and reading. But he was also a child who could not tolerate imperfection, who melted down completely when puzzles did not solve themselves instantly, who threw tantrums that sent experienced nannies fleeing and therapists reaching for prescription pads. Victoria had hired the best specialists that her considerable money could buy. Child psychologists with impressive credentials, behavioral therapists who published papers in academic journals. None of them lasted more than a few months before admitting defeat. And now a janitor who earned less in a year than Victoria spent on Oliver's therapy bills had done in 30 quiet seconds what years of expensive professional intervention had failed to accomplish. The conference room on the 32nd floor had been designed by expensive architects specifically to intimidate, and it succeeded magnificently at that purpose. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed the sprawling city below, like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. The table was polished mahogany, and at its head sat Victoria Ashford with her laptop open to the camera footage she had watched 17 times since yesterday. Ethan stood just inside the heavy door, still wearing his gray maintenance uniform with his name stitched above the pocket, still carrying the faint smell of industrial cleaner that marked him as someone who did not belong in rooms like this. Victoria did not offer him a seat. She pressed play without preamble. The footage showed Ethan catching Oliver's wrist, pulling the boy away from the wall. Victoria paused on the frame where Ethan's hand wrapped around her son's arm. She asked him to explain exactly what she was looking at. Her voice was cold enough to frost the windows. Ethan met her gaze without flinching. He explained that Oliver had been about to hurt himself. The boy was hitting the wall repeatedly, and the skin was already red. He stopped him because that was what needed to happen. Victoria's eyes narrowed with suspicion. She pointed out that Ethan had grabbed her child without permission, without any authority, without any right to touch him. Ethan acknowledged that he had, then added without apology that he would do it again if Oliver was about to injure himself. He said he was sorry if that was not the answer Victoria wanted, but it was the truth. The silence that followed was suffocating. Victoria leaned forward, ready to deliver the termination speech she had rehearsed. Then the conference room door opened. Oliver stood in the doorway. He looked at his mother first, then at Ethan. Something passed across his face, a calculation that seemed too old for his 7 years. Without speaking, Oliver walked across the carpet to where Ethan stood. He positioned himself beside the janitor, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. He did not speak. Victoria watched her son choose a stranger over her, and something cracked behind the careful facade she had spent years constructing. She dismissed them both, her voice tight with something she refused to name. But she did not fire Ethan that day. And that night, sitting alone in her office long after everyone had gone home, Victoria pulled up the camera footage again. Alone in the darkness of her corner office, Victoria watched the footage for the 43rd time. The building had emptied of its usual bustle, leaving only the hum of climate control and the distant sound of traffic below. Victoria sat in the blue glow of her laptop, searching the video for evidence of malice she knew she would never find. She had built her career on reading people, on detecting weakness and exploiting hesitation. In boardrooms across 3 continents, she had stared down competitors and enemies, dissecting their intentions with surgical precision. But Ethan Mercer's face revealed nothing except patience. His hands revealed nothing except steadiness. His voice revealed nothing except calm. The specialists she had hired approached Oliver like a problem to be solved. They came armed with techniques and interventions, and Oliver sensed their clinical distance immediately. He rejected them with fury and withdrawal. But Ethan had no techniques, no strategies. He simply saw a child in pain and responded with presence. Victoria paused the footage at the moment Oliver's body began to relax. She studied her son's face, the way his clenched jaw softened, the way his rigid shoulders dropped, the way his wild eyes lost their panicked glaze. She had never been able to do that. In 7 years of motherhood, through countless meltdowns and tantrums that left her shaking with frustration and guilt, she had never found the key that unlocked her son's distress. Victoria clicked to a different folder, one she had never shown anyone, one she barely admitted existed. It contained footage of herself. She watched a video from 3 weeks ago. Oliver struggling with homework. She watched herself enter the playroom with her phone still in hand, distracted by emails, impatient to resolve the crisis quickly. She watched herself raise her voice at her struggling son. She watched Oliver shut down completely, retreating to a corner where he sat rocking, hands pressed over his ears, eyes squeezed shut against a world that had become too loud. She watched herself stand there helplessly, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to reach him. Victoria returned to the footage of Ethan. There was a moment near the end she had missed before. After Oliver had calmed, the boy looked up at Ethan with an expression Victoria had to enlarge to understand. It was hope, pure and unguarded hope. Her son had looked at a janitor with more hope than he had ever shown his own mother. Victoria closed the laptop and sat in darkness for a long time, feeling the foundations of everything she believed about herself beginning to shift. The offer came 3 days later, delivered with the same cold efficiency Victoria brought to every business transaction. Ethan stood before her desk, summoned from his maintenance rounds by a secretary who looked at him with barely concealed confusion. Janitors did not receive summons to the executive floor. Victoria did not waste time with pleasantries. She told Ethan she wanted him to spend time with Oliver after his regular shift. 1 hour per day, supervised in the executive daycare. She would compensate him at double his hourly rate. Ethan stared at her as though she had suggested he perform surgery. He said he was a janitor, not a childcare provider. Victoria said she was aware of what he was. Ethan said Oliver needed a professional, someone who understood what was going on with him, someone trained to help kids like Oliver. Victoria's jaw tightened. She told Ethan that Oliver had seen 11 professionals in 2 years. None had been able to do what Ethan did in that playroom. Ethan shook his head. He said he had not done anything. He had just been there. Victoria replied that being there was apparently more than anyone else had managed. The silence stretched between them. Ethan finally asked why he would say yes. He said it was not his place to get involved in her family. He had his own daughter to worry about, his own life to manage, and getting tangled up in whatever was happening between Victoria and her son was not something he had signed up for. Victoria's expression flickered, something vulnerable passing across her face. She said she was not asking him to get tangled up in anything. She was asking him to help her son. Ethan held her gaze. He said that, from what he could see, her son was not the only one who needed help. Before Victoria could respond, the office door opened, and Lily Mercer slipped inside, followed by the flustered secretary, who had been watching her in the lobby. Lily was small for her age, with her father's dark hair and her mother's gentle eyes. She looked around the corner office with frank curiosity, taking in the expensive furniture and sweeping views before her attention landed on the photograph of Oliver displayed on Victoria's credenza. Lily pointed to the photo and said she knew that boy. She had seen him in the playroom downstairs. He had been trying to build something, but the pieces would not fit, and he got really upset. Lily continued matter-of-factly. She said he just needed someone to show him how to do it, one piece at a time. That was what Daddy always told her when things got too hard. You do not look at the whole thing. You just look at the next piece. Victoria stared at this 7-year-old girl who had just articulated something 11 specialists had failed to communicate. Lily looked up at her father. She said the boy in the picture seemed really sad and asked if Daddy was going to help him. Ethan looked at his daughter, then at Victoria, then back at his daughter. He sighed and said it seemed like maybe he was. The janitor's supply room in the basement of Ashford Holdings was not designed for children. It was cramped, filled with industrial cleaning supplies and spare light bulbs. But Ethan had cleared a corner near the small window, and that corner had become something unexpected. Oliver sat on an overturned bucket, watching Ethan's hands move with precision over the model airplane that had caused such disaster 2 weeks ago. The same model, the same pieces. But this time, Ethan was showing him how to approach it differently. Ethan said they were not going to think about the whole plane. They were just going to think about this one piece right here. He held up a small plastic component. He asked Oliver where he thought it might go. Oliver studied the piece with intense concentration. He pointed to a spot on the fuselage. Ethan nodded and said that was exactly right. He told Oliver to go ahead and try it. Oliver reached for the piece with trembling fingers. His whole body was tense, braced for failure, ready to erupt if things did not go perfectly. But this time, when he pressed the piece into place, and it clicked home with a satisfying snap, Oliver exhaled. His shoulders dropped. A small smile flickered across his face. Ethan said that was one piece done and asked if Oliver was ready for the next one. Oliver nodded, something shifting in his eyes. For the first time in as long as he could remember, the next step did not feel overwhelming. It felt manageable. It felt possible. They worked together for the next 40 minutes, piece by piece, step by step. Ethan never rushed. He never showed frustration when Oliver hesitated or needed to try multiple times. He simply waited, patient as stone, until Oliver found his way forward. When the session ended, Oliver looked at the half-completed airplane with wonder. He said he had never gotten this far before. Ethan smiled and said they would finish it tomorrow. Oliver said he had broken this same model 3 times already. He said every time he got stuck, he threw it against the wall, and his mom had to buy a new one. Ethan said getting stuck was not the same as failing. He said getting stuck just meant you needed to find a different way through. Oliver considered this. He said his mom never got stuck on anything. She always knew exactly what to do. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said everyone got stuck sometimes. He said some people were just better at hiding it than others. On the other side of the building, 32 floors above, Victoria sat watching the camera feed from the supply room. She had installed a new camera there 3 days ago, hidden behind a stack of paper towels. She watched her son smile. She watched him relax. She watched him reach out and place his hand on Ethan's shoulder in a gesture of gratitude, so natural, so unforced, that it made her breath catch in her throat. Victoria closed the laptop and pressed her palms against her eyes. She had spent 7 years trying to fix her son. And in a janitor's supply closet, surrounded by mops and cleaning chemicals, Oliver had found something she had never been able to give him: peace. The discovery came on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by the building's facilities manager with casual efficiency. Gerald Morrison was 53 years old, meticulous about building codes, and certain that the camera he had found hidden in the executive daycare violated corporate policies and possibly state laws. The camera, he explained, was not part of the building's official security system. It was a personal device installed without authorization in a space where children were present. If parents learned their children had been secretly surveilled, if the media got wind of unauthorized recording in a daycare facility, the liability would be catastrophic. Victoria sat motionless, her face revealing nothing, while her mind raced. Gerald asked if she had any idea who might have installed such a device. Victoria said she did not. Gerald said building security was reviewing access logs to determine who had been in the daycare after hours. They would find whoever was responsible, and there would be consequences. Victoria nodded and told him to keep her informed. After Gerald left, Victoria remained frozen for 17 minutes. Those cameras were her secret, her protection, her way of watching over Oliver when she could not be physically present. She had installed hidden cameras in the playroom, in the supply closet, in every space where Oliver spent time. If the truth came out, if anyone discovered that the CEO had been secretly recording not just her own child, but other people's children, the scandal would be devastating. Her ex-husband's lawyers would have the ammunition they needed. The custody agreement would be reopened. She could lose Oliver. She could lose everything. 3 floors below, in a supply closet that smelled of pine cleaner, Ethan looked up at the camera hidden behind the paper towels and felt something shift in his understanding of Victoria Ashford. He had noticed the device 2 days ago, but had said nothing. He had watched Victoria watching him through that hidden lens, had seen the red light blink when she accessed the feed remotely, had understood finally why she always seemed to know what happened in every corner of her building. She was not a tyrant. She was a mother paralyzed by fear, so terrified of losing her son that she had built an empire of surveillance to keep him safe. Ethan thought of Sarah, of the months after her diagnosis when he had installed baby monitors in every room of their apartment, desperate to hear if she needed him, unable to sleep without knowing she was still breathing. Fear made people do strange things. Fear made people build walls when they should be building bridges. Ethan looked at Oliver, who was carefully placing another piece on the model airplane, and made a decision that would change everything. The emergency board meeting convened at 9 o'clock on Thursday morning, but the atmosphere suggested a trial rather than a corporate gathering. 12 members of the Ashford Holdings board sat around the mahogany conference table, their faces grave. Gerald Morrison had prepared a detailed report on the unauthorized cameras, complete with photographs and policy citations and legal opinions that all pointed toward the same conclusion. Someone had committed a serious violation. Someone needed to be held accountable. Victoria sat at the head of the table, her face a mask concealing the panic clawing at her chest. She had prepared 3 different statements, 3 different strategies, 3 different ways to deflect, blame, or minimize damage. None of them felt adequate. The board chairman was asking for an investigation timeline when the conference room door opened. Ethan Mercer stepped inside, still wearing his maintenance uniform, still carrying the faint smell of cleaning supplies. The board members turned to stare at him with varying degrees of confusion and irritation. Victoria's heart stopped. Ethan walked to the head of the table and stood beside Victoria's chair. He addressed the room calmly, telling them that he was the one who had installed the cameras. He explained that he worked with the children in the daycare as part of his maintenance rounds and had wanted to monitor the space to ensure the kids were safe when he was not there. He acknowledged he should have gone through proper channels and was aware his employment would likely be terminated. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria stared at Ethan with shock, confusion, and something that might have been gratitude. The board chairman asked if Ethan understood that what he had done might constitute a criminal offense. He said recording children without parental consent was not something the company could simply overlook. Ethan said he understood and was prepared to accept whatever consequences the board deemed appropriate. The meeting dissolved into chaos, board members conferring in urgent whispers while legal counsel was summoned. Through it all, Victoria sat motionless, watching the janitor who had just sacrificed his job, his reputation, and possibly his freedom to protect a woman who had never shown him anything but cold dismissal. She did not understand, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria Ashford felt something crack open in her chest that might have been hope. The address Ethan had given Human Resources led Victoria to a neighborhood she had only seen from the windows of town cars. Pilsen was a world away from downtown Chicago, where murals covered brick walls and the smell of street food drifted from corner restaurants and children played on cracked sidewalks. Victoria parked her Mercedes 3 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, her designer heels clicking against uneven concrete. Ethan's building was a 4-story walk-up with a broken front buzzer and a lobby that smelled of cooking spices. She climbed 3 flights of creaking stairs and knocked on a door with peeling paint and a child's drawing taped at eye level. Ethan opened the door without surprise. For a moment, neither spoke. He was wearing jeans and a faded flannel shirt, feet bare on worn carpet. Behind him, Victoria could see a small living room crowded with secondhand furniture and children's books stacked on every surface. Ethan stepped aside and said she might as well come in. The apartment was tiny by any standard Victoria understood. The kitchen barely large enough for one person. The living room served triple duty as dining room, playroom, and Ethan's bedroom, judging by the pillow and blanket on the couch. But it was clean, it was warm, and every surface showed evidence of love. Lily's drawings covered the refrigerator. Her books were arranged by color on a shelf Ethan had clearly built himself. Victoria stood in the center of the room, feeling suddenly overdressed, overprivileged in a way that made her expensive clothes feel like a costume. She told Ethan she did not understand why he had done it. He had taken responsibility for something that could destroy his life, something he had no part in. Ethan sat on the arm of the couch. He said he had watched her watching Oliver through those cameras. He had seen the fear in her face, even through a computer screen. He knew what it felt like to be terrified of losing the person you loved most. Victoria's composure cracked. She asked what he knew about her fear. Ethan was quiet. Then he told her about Sarah, about the diagnosis, about watching her fade away while he stood helpless beside her, about the baby monitors he had installed in every room because he could not bear the thought of her needing him and him not being there. He told her about the night Sarah died, about the sound of the monitor going silent, about the empty space that had lived in his chest ever since. Victoria sat down heavily. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, with this kind of raw honesty, this willingness to be seen. A door opened at the end of the hallway, and Lily emerged with Oliver beside her. Victoria startled. She had not known Oliver was here. Oliver walked across the room and stood in front of his mother. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke. He said Ethan was different from the others. He said when he was with Ethan, his brain did not feel so loud. He said Ethan never made him feel broken. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She could not stop. Oliver reached out and took Ethan's hand, like a lifeline, like something precious he was afraid to lose. He looked at his mother and said it simply. Ethan actually understood him. Victoria looked at her son holding a janitor's hand with more trust than he had ever shown her, and something fundamental shifted in her understanding of what family could mean. The board's decision came 3 days after Ethan's confession, delivered in a formal letter that Victoria intercepted before it could reach its intended recipient. Ethan Mercer was to be terminated immediately. His final paycheck would be withheld pending legal review. The company reserved the right to pursue criminal charges. Oliver found out before Victoria could figure out how to tell him. He found out because he went to the supply room where he and Ethan had been building their airplane and Ethan was not there. He found out because he asked maintenance workers where Ethan had gone and none would meet his eyes. He found out because he was a brilliant child who understood far more than adults gave him credit for, and silence told its own story. The meltdown that followed was unlike anything Victoria had witnessed. Oliver did not throw things. He did not hit walls. He simply shut down entirely, retreating to a corner of the playroom where he sat with knees pulled to his chest, rocking, hands pressed over his ears, completely unreachable. The daycare staff called Victoria. The company therapist came and went, unable to break through. 3 hours passed, then 4, then 5. Victoria sat on the floor, outside the corner where Oliver had barricaded himself, her designer suit wrinkled and stained, her carefully maintained facade abandoned. She spoke to him quietly, not expecting a response. She told him she was sorry. She said she had spent so long trying to protect him that she had forgotten how to connect with him. She told him she had installed those cameras because she was terrified of losing him, because his father's lawyers were always watching, always waiting for her to make a mistake. She told him Ethan had taken the blame because he understood something she was only beginning to learn. Love was not about control. It was about trust. It was about being present, even when scared, especially when scared. She said she was going to fix this. She did not know how yet, but she would find a way. Oliver finally looked at her. His voice was small and raw. He said he did not want Ethan to go away. Victoria reached out slowly, giving Oliver time to pull back if he needed to. He did not pull back. She took his hand, and he let her. She said Ethan was not going anywhere. She promised him on everything she had. The next morning, Victoria Ashford walked into the board meeting she had called and did something she had never done in her entire professional career. She told the truth. She stood at the head of the conference table where she had sat so many times before, delivering quarterly reports and carefully crafted narratives. Today, she had no carefully crafted narrative. She told the board that Ethan Mercer had not installed those cameras. She had. She explained that she had been surveilling her own son because she was terrified her ex-husband would find some way to take custody away. She said her fear had led her to violate company policy, to potentially break laws, and to let an innocent man take the blame for her actions. She paused, letting the weight of her confession settle. Then she continued. She said she was prepared to accept full responsibility. She would step down as CEO if the board required it. She would face whatever legal consequences came her way. But she would not allow Ethan Mercer to be punished for her mistakes. The chairman asked what exactly Victoria was proposing. Victoria said she was proposing Ethan be reinstated immediately with full back pay. She was proposing the company issue a formal apology for the wrongful termination. And she was proposing that if the board felt someone needed to be held accountable, that someone should be her. One board member leaned forward. She said what Victoria was describing would be a public relations nightmare. If this became public, stockholders would lose confidence, partners would reconsider contracts, competitors would exploit the weakness. Victoria met her eyes. She said she was aware of the risks. She said she was also aware that she had spent her entire career building a company on the principle that integrity mattered. She asked how she could expect that from her employees if she was not willing to demand it from herself. The chairman said the board would need time to deliberate. He asked Victoria to wait outside. Victoria paused at the door. She said that whatever they decided about her position, she wanted it on record that Ethan Mercer was the most honorable person she had ever met. He had sacrificed his livelihood to protect a woman who had never shown him anything but contempt. And that kind of integrity should be rewarded, not punished. She walked out and closed the door behind her. Oliver was waiting in the hallway, holding Lily's hand. Victoria looked at her son, at the daughter of the man who had changed everything, at the small, hopeful faces turned up toward her. Oliver asked if Ethan was going to be okay. Victoria knelt down, so she was at eye level with both children. She said she was going to make sure of it. And for the first time in 7 years, Oliver smiled at his mother without reservation. The board's decision came 2 hours later. Victoria would remain as CEO. Ethan would be reinstated with full back pay and a formal apology. And the cameras would be removed. Every single one from every space in the building. Victoria walked out of the conference room and found Ethan waiting by the elevator. She told him it was over. He was getting his job back. She had told them everything. Ethan studied her face for a long moment. Then, he asked what everything meant. Victoria allowed herself a small smile. She said it meant she had finally stopped hiding behind cameras and started showing up in person. The elevator doors opened. Victoria said Oliver was downstairs with Lily. She asked if Ethan would like to come see them. Ethan stepped into the elevator beside her. She asked him why he had done it, why he had taken the blame when he could have simply walked away and let her face the consequences alone. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said Oliver needed someone to show him that people could be trusted. He said if Ethan had let Victoria take the fall publicly, if the board had destroyed her in front of her son, Oliver would have learned the world was exactly as cold and unforgiving as he already feared. He said some lessons were worth more than job security. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened onto the lobby, where Victoria and Ethan had passed each other dozens of times, without acknowledgement, without connection. Oliver and Lily were waiting by the security desk, their heads bent together over the model airplane. Oliver clutched like a treasure. When Oliver saw Ethan, his face transformed. He ran across the lobby and threw himself into Ethan's arms with a force that made the janitor stagger. Oliver held on tight, face pressed against Ethan's shoulder, small body shaking with relief. Victoria watched her son embrace the man who had taught him that trust was possible and felt the last of her walls begin to crumble. She had spent 7 years trying to control every variable in Oliver's life. She had built an empire of surveillance and hired armies of specialists and done everything in her power to protect her son from a world that felt dangerous and unpredictable. But Oliver had not needed protection. He had needed presence. He had needed patience. He had needed someone who saw him not as a problem to be solved, but as a child to be loved. Victoria walked across the lobby and stood beside Ethan and Oliver and Lily. She looked at them, at the unlikely family that had formed in supply closets and conference rooms and the quiet moments between crises. Oliver looked up at her. He asked if Ethan was staying. Victoria said he was staying. She said if Ethan wanted to, if he was willing, she would like him to stay for a very long time. Ethan met her eyes. Something passed between them that did not need words. He said he thought he would like that. 6 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon in early spring, Victoria stood in her penthouse apartment and removed the last camera from her private life. It was a small device hidden in the crown molding of her living room where it had watched over Oliver for 3 years. She held it in her palm for a moment, feeling its weight, remembering all the hours she had spent watching her son through its tiny lens. Then she dropped it in the trash. Oliver was in the kitchen with Lily, the 2 children working together on a new model, something more complicated than the airplane, something that required patience and precision, and the kind of step-by-step collaboration Oliver had learned in a janitor's supply closet. Ethan stood by the window, watching the Chicago skyline with an expression Victoria had come to recognize as contentment. She walked over and stood beside him. She told him it was done. She said she was not going to watch through screens anymore. Ethan did not say anything. He simply took her hand. From the kitchen came the sound of children's laughter, bright and unself-conscious and free. Oliver's voice carried across the room. He was explaining something to Lily, showing her how to fit 2 pieces together, his tone patient, in a way that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. When the pieces clicked into place, both children cheered. Victoria watched her son teach another child the lessons he had learned from a man who mopped floors for a living. She watched him share his hard-won piece with someone else, multiplying it, spreading it, proving that healing was not a finite resource, but something that grew when you gave it away. She squeezed Ethan's hand. She said she used to think that if she could just see everything, she could control everything. She said if she could control everything, she could keep Oliver safe. Ethan turned to look at her. He asked what she thought now. Victoria watched Oliver and Lily bent over their project, their heads close together, their movements synchronized in the easy rhythm of friendship. She said now she thought safety was not about seeing everything. It was about trusting the people you loved to find their own way. It was about being present instead of watching from a distance. It was about letting go of fear and choosing faith instead. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, painting the room in shades of gold. Oliver looked up from his project and caught his mother's eye. He smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face. He said the model was almost done and asked if she wanted to see it. Victoria said she would love to see it. She walked across the room and knelt beside her son, entering his world instead of observing it from above. Ethan followed, and Lily made room for both adults in the circle of creation she and Oliver had built. 4 people gathered around a half-finished model in a penthouse apartment in Chicago, their lives intertwined in ways none of them could have predicted. A CEO who had learned that control was not the same as love. A janitor who had taught a child that trust was possible. A boy who had discovered that his mind was not a prison, but a gift. A girl who had shown everyone that wisdom sometimes came in small packages. Victoria looked around the circle at the family that had formed not through blood or contract, but through presence and patience, and the simple, radical act of showing up. She did not know what the future held. She did not know if she and Ethan would build something lasting or if their connection would fade with time. She did not know if Oliver's progress would continue or if there would be setbacks and struggles ahead. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was done watching life through cameras. From now on, she was going to live it. Outside the window, the city stretched toward the horizon, millions of lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to predict or control. Somewhere out there, people were making mistakes and finding redemption, building walls and tearing them down, learning the hard way that love required vulnerability and trust required courage, and family was not something you inherited, but something you chose. Victoria chose this. She chose presence over surveillance, connection over control, faith over fear. And in the golden light of a Saturday afternoon, surrounded by the people who had taught her what those words actually meant, she finally understood what she had been searching for all along. Not safety. Not control. Not the ability to see everything and prevent every possible harm. Just this. Just love. Just trust. Just the courage to believe that sometimes the cameras do not tell the whole story. And sometimes the truth is better than anything you could have captured on film.